Welcome to Part the System, and today I'm with Emma Sherry. How are you, Emma?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Really looking forward to this. So, a little bit about Emma. Emma's a professor at Swinburne University, specialising in the area of sports for development, and is currently Department Chair for Management and Marketing in the Swinburne Business School. Now, Emma's current research interests include community development through sports activities, undertaking a broad range of research projects with national and regional sports organisations in Australia and globally, including the Commonwealth Secretariat, Victorian Government, Vic Health, Netball Australia, National Rugby League, Australian Football League, and Tennis Australia. Other research has included access and equity in sports participation, in sport in correctional facilities, which sounds super interesting. I'd love to dig into a little bit later, and sports and recreation for at-risk marginalised communities. Now, Emma is supervising a number of PhD students at the moment in areas of sports for development, wearable tracking devices for high-performance athletes, and social impact for sport for Australian Indigenous communities. Now, outside of her academic career, Emma has worked in roles of area of sport and facility, event and recreational management within local government and the university sports sector. Now, I think you've just recently stepped down as the appointed director and the immediate past president at Tennis Victoria, and sits on the advisory committee of the Australian Sports Innovation Centre of Excellence. That's quite some bio there, Emma.
Thank you. Yes, I feel tired just listening to that.
Yes, certainly very busy. So we'll get straight into it. What does well-being mean to you?
I think well-being is really multifaceted. So it's about being healthy and well across your whole self. So for me, that really means healthy body, which is, I guess, the easier one to focus on, but also healthy mentally and socially. And I think for me, working in sport, and particularly the type of work that I do with sport communities, that idea of social health and having strong social connections and support networks, I think COVID made us really realise how important that is, that we could continue to walk around the block or we could talk to a counsellor if we needed to, but that connection or disconnection from people who love us and we love and support is really, really important to our well-being. So that's what I've learned even more so over the last couple of years of what well-being means to me.
Yeah, I think it's really put things in perspective, hasn't it? The pandemic and that connection with people is really important. What are some of the things that you do to look after your well-being then?
A variety of different things, and I think it's changed as I'm getting older and a bit more creaky. So I do still go to the gym. I'm learning to kayak at the moment because we live close to the river.
What, you've just started that up?
Yeah, literally my first session was on Sunday.
Right.
Because my little boy is going to learn to kayak. So I have this image of my son and I, he's 10, kayaking down the river as he becomes an unruly teenager. It might be some nice alone time with his boring old mum. And I think I've always had a really strong affinity with water. I was a swimmer as my sport. I did rowing, those kinds of things. So I think that feeds back into that well-being of a physical activity where I can be on or in the water. Hits a number of different well-being aspects for me. I love pottering in the garden and spending time with people I love. They're really the key things. So a nice mix around. And I think also just taking time. This year I've really worked hard on not working on weekends. I don't always succeed, but trying to set some healthy boundaries I think has been really key for me to get a stronger sense of well-being during a challenging time.
Yeah, just get that little bit of disconnection from your work and that work-life balance. And I love that tactic with your son. So if you need that mother and son time, and you get in a canoe or a kayak, there's nowhere he can go, is there? So and anywhere near the water, I think is what you're saying for you, which I think we're really lucky, aren't we, being in Australia?
Absolutely.
So yeah, tell me a bit about your story, Emma.
So I've got I guess a different or non-traditional route for both a sport person and an academic. So I do wear both hats pretty comfortably. I've always enjoyed sport. I've never been super good. I've been better than average, but not high performance by any stretch of the imagination. But even just like I've said now, I'm still in my mid-40s, happy to have a crack at learning new things. So I really believe that sport isn't just for high performance, and it should be something that can be enjoyed by everyone and learned at any point in time.
Mm.
And that really came through my family have been very strongly involved in sport. So my mum was an athlete. She played cricket for Australia as a junior way back when. So I've never not had a parent who has played sport. So mum continued to play cricket and indoor cricket right up and through into my teenage years.
That must have been great having a role model like that as a female as well in sport. Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely, and I think that really founded it. And the other hat that I wear of why I do the work that I do is our family is also driven from family. So our family very strong social justice. So my grandmother was involved in politics and was very socially progressive and did a lot of work in the community to make the world a better place for people who may not have had those opportunities. So all of that melting pot of my family with very strong women. So people who know me won't be surprised. I'm a bit of a loudmouth feminist and an advocate for social change.
Yeah,
that's very much in my bloodline. And sport's just the place where I get to play those things out. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So I've always wanted to leave the world in a better place than I found it. For me, sport's a place where I think there's a lot of opportunity where we can help make that happen.
Yeah, sounds like the conditions that you had growing up and with your family really have provided you with, a great kind of opportunity to do the work that you do now. And I suppose that links into this passion that you've got for sports development.
Yeah.
Yeah, and is that really where it came from?
Absolutely. So when I did my PhD, nearly 20 years ago, not quite, maybe 15, I was looking at sport organisations and governance, so how they were organised and managed. But I actually became much more interested in the influence that they had in the communities that they worked in and things like that. So I've still done governance with my board roles, but my research interest really pivoted to the role that sport and sport organisations can play in their local community, but right up until the global stage. But the research interest really, it came from one of those very serendipitous moments where I picked up a copy of The Big Issue, that street magazine that I know the UK has and also in Australia, globally now. And Australia was sending its first team to the Homeless World Cup. And I rang them and said, this is really interesting. I'm a sport researcher. I was barely a sport researcher at that point in time. I'd love to talk to you about doing a project. And that tiny idea from that article came a 6-year relationship with the Australian Street Soccer program and really served the foundation of my career. And the sport for development movement in Australia was very nascent in the 2000s. So I think that was 2006 when Australia sent its first team. So it really was a new concept that sport was being used really purposefully as a tool for development as opposed to as a side effect. So I found myself in this space that was really exciting, but we didn't know much about, which is a researcher's dream. So that's really how that all came about.
Yeah, great. And I think, Big Issue, fantastic organisation and, supporting people, with homelessness. But good on you for just reaching out. Talk about, grasping the opportunity. I love that. And where do you think Australia is in terms of sports for development, as opposed to maybe, the UK, which is obviously an older kind of country. We're obviously only around 200 years old, but using sports for development for good in terms of, social outcomes and stuff. Where do you think we're at?
Australia's a really interesting case study. So the UK is probably a decade ahead as far as formalised sport for development organisations and funding and initiatives. So early 2000s, we saw that first sort of work coming through in the establishment of government funding for sport to create social change, which again then starts a movement. It's also when we saw the UN Office for Sport for Development and Peace was formed around that same time. So the UK and Europe were about 5 to 10 years ahead. And Australia very quickly jumped in. And I think similar to the UK, Australia does have a more government-funded focused sport for development ecosystem. So state governments, organisations like Vic Health and federal governments do invest in sport as a tool to create social change. Whereas in countries like the US, which is probably the same length of time as Australia, but they have much more of a social entrepreneur, philanthropic approach. There's less government funding and more social entrepreneurship or donor funding underpinning theirs.
Right.
So these three countries, Canada's similar, New Zealand, but these countries have kind of all kicked off since the 2000s with different ways of doing it. And I think Australia's been a world leader in how they've worked with the region. So a lot of my more recent work has been working with the sports that are funded through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade programs as outreach to Pacific Island states and island nations to use sport as a tool to create health outcomes or women's empowerment outcomes or education and things like that. That's been really interesting to see that really direct correlation of Australia investing significantly over now nearly 8 years, I think, in that sort of work. Whereas I know in the UK setting, so organisations like Comic Relief have done a lot of that in Africa, for example. So the mechanisms are different. But
get your red nose.
Yes, absolutely. So I do think we've started to see Australia come into its own about how it's taken that really strong regional and also starting to embed that in the day-to-day in our domestic context, because obviously we still have communities that are in need of extra supports or some strength-based programs, and sport's an effective tool for those communities in our domestic setting as well.
That's really interesting, Emma. Thanks for sharing, particularly around the difference culturally, where you say in America's maybe more entrepreneurship, philanthropic, whereas the UK maybe a lot more government funded, where they maybe recognise, around the importance of how sports development can play. And then from what I'm hearing in Australia, we focus more on the regional settings to, as we progress and grow that kind of movement. And that's where I think the work that you do at Swinburne is so important, because it's how we're evaluating the impact of this stuff, which is really, really, important to what we're talking about. And in your bio there, I mentioned that you've done some work with correctional facilities. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your research around that.
So that was a while ago, but it really was a life-changing experience as a researcher. I've never been more aware of my privilege, having to check in and out of one of Melbourne's highest security jails.
Wow.
So we did with the street soccer program, so with the Big Issue, they ran a weekly program in a unit at Port Phillip Prison, which was particularly in the intellectual disability unit.
Right.
And that program ran once a week, every week, even if it was Christmas Day. It became a really key part of their offering. And so it was an honour and a privilege to be involved in helping evaluate that particular setting, because the idea of it is it gave them an opportunity for recreation in a structured and supported environment. And longer term, the aim was that on release they could then be incorporated into the community street soccer programs and start getting those social support networks that we were talking about at the very start. There's a lot of people who've ended up in the corrections system, recidivism, so returning back to prison happens again and again. So the premise was that if they can create this environment in prison, then they might be able to transfer that outside. And a colleague of mine did some similar work up at the Townsville Women's Correction Facility, which was up in far north Queensland. Lots of work with large number of Aboriginal women. So again, similar premise of creating social supports and structures for people who may not have had that before, to give them a moment of joy in a difficult situation when they're in prison, but again with the idea that they would connect out to community on release. So it was fascinating.
That sounds such a powerful project, and I think from an experience point of view, I'd love to ask you, what personally you said that was like a life-changing experience for you. What was it for you that kind of changed, or what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I think predominantly how privileged, like I'm very aware of my privilege. So well educated, white, English speaking, all of those things. But when you notice and work with people who in many cases are there but for the grace of God, so bad decisions, and again because this was in the intellectual disability unit, may not have had the capacity to make good decisions, and they didn't have those social networks around them to keep them on track. It became really clear of how vulnerable members of our community are, and how the structures and systems in our society don't always catch everyone in the way they're meant to, and they can fall through the gaps.
Yeah.
So I think, don't get me wrong, there were people in there who should be in there. That's okay. But there were lots of people where you could see, you don't have the capacity to make these decisions for yourself. How could we have better supported you so you didn't end up in this situation in particular? Because a lot of the stories, we weren't allowed to speak to the prisoners or the people around there, why they were in jail or what they'd done, because obviously you don't want to risk them putting themselves in a worse situation. So I made that clear. But you did realise that a number of them had come and gone in the system quite regularly, so they weren't getting the support on release to start fresh. And I think that's what the program was really trying to do. So I think it's made me really realise how there are so many things that people, whether it was their mental capacity in this case or the colour of their skin or their family background, that they had no control over, that brought them into that situation. And then how can we as a community help those people who through no fault other than just an accident of birth ended up with a particular family or with a particular skin colour or with a particular ability. So I think that was what I learned. And I think it's also framed how I deal with my work and my colleagues of like, you reckon you've got it bad, you're actually okay. So whenever I feel like I want to whinge about something, I remember the people who I've worked with over these 10 to 15 years going, actually, Emma, you're okay. Give it a rest.
Exactly, and I think that just gives you an extra layer of insight, doesn't it, to what's going on. If we think about it from a systems approach, it's we can't just stereotype and think people that are in prison, it's that it's all their fault, because like you said, its circumstances do play a part in it, and we can't be so quickly to judge, I think, around this stuff. So I'm also interested, what was the impact of the program? So you said that once they got out of prison, then, for that continuation, they were then enrolled into kind of a football program. Have you got any statistics around that?
We didn't ever get a lot of follow-up from it, unfortunately. And the primary reason, again, it's a systems issue, is the program was often not told when people were being released. So we wouldn't necessarily get the advance notice that someone was coming out to scoop them back up. So I think it was a very ad hoc way of trying to attract people. I know that some did end up in the programming, but as I said, this was a while ago, so I haven't been able to follow them through. But I know that they still do go there, and it's still a very important part of their offer. So I think they wouldn't have kept on doing it if they weren't with the people and helping the people that the program's designed to.
Oh, fantastic. And I spoke to somebody on part of the system in one of my first couple of episodes, and who was helping get people into employment and training from prison, and Dean said that, if you want to have a social impact, give a person a job who's coming out of prison, because it's not just for them, it's their family as well, and it can make a huge difference to communities. And I think it does take a village sometimes. So tell me more about the work you do at Swinburne University and the Sports Innovation Research Unit.
So we're a relatively new group, but full of older researchers. So myself and Adam Card, who some people may know, have come from different unis, and we came together at Swinburne a couple of years ago. And we've tried really hard to create a research group that focuses on doing things differently. And Swinburne's a really interesting university. It's quite a small university, so it lets us be really connected with parts of the organisation that we wouldn't necessarily normally get to be. So we get to play with things, and I use the word play on purpose because it feels like fun sometimes. Neuromarketing labs where we can check out people's brain reactions to things, and
Wow.
big data teams and stuff like that. So what we've tried to create is an environment where we can look at innovation, but not just tech. So tech's a key part of it, but social and policy innovation is really where my work tends to sit, of how we can, and innovation just means creating change. So how can we and our work help inform change, whether that's policy lever change, whether that's social progress movements, whether that's technological change across the different areas of sport. So Adam's work really talks to things like consumer marketing and sport fandom and that sort of high performance commercial side of sport. My work talks around this social and policy innovation, and then we have this really lovely overlap where we combine those areas for things like we recently did a big piece of work for Royal Life Saving Society of Australia, which looked at the social impact of swimming pools. So we got to combine our expertise there to help understand, why people love pools so much and what value it creates in their communities.
Yeah,
So,
and just on that, I don't think we'd ever really understood that before. So, just to hold that for a second, it's like we know this how important swimming pools are to Australia. There's one nearly in every well, as you said, town, or definitely LGA, and it's part of the Australian culture. So to understand that value is absolutely huge.
it really is. And I think our research found something like 90+% of Australians live within 20 kilometres of a pool. And we see it whenever anyone tries to close one down.
Oh, it's political.
You really do see that groundswell, because it's more than just a place to swim.
Yes.
And that was really great to have that experience in that project, because we did get to talk to people who really articulated that, again, it's that social connection. It's a place where they met their husband. It's a place they grieved with their water aerobics friends when their husband passed. That there's strong social hubs. And I think that's what I love about sport. And a swimming pool's one, but your footy netball club, your cricket club, your golf club, your pony club, whatever club it is a place where sport happens, sure, but it's more than that. It's really where people come together and create a community and support each other. So I think that's really what I love about sport. Now, it's got its bad things, but that's really where the value of sport can really be lent into, and I think it's great.
And with the work that you do at Swinburne, there's such a broad range of different areas there, talking tech and policy and social value. And you're saying you're only small, but you seem to pack a punch, because I do see Swinburne around quite a lot, whether it's research papers, etc. But yeah, how big's your team?
So we've got a growing team. We started with 2 of us 2 years ago. We've got 3 what we call teaching and research staff, so regular academics. We've now got 3 research fellows, so contract research only staff, and we've currently got 5 PhD students and 4 more coming in the new year. So we really feel like we've gone from 0 to 100. And then we've got other colleagues around the university who work with us on different programs. So from exercise science, people from marketing, people from the sociology area, different groups come and work with us on different projects as well. So we're really lucky that we've got a tight, small focused team, but we play well with others across the university to do other exciting things where we don't have the capacity. So we're really lucky.
Yeah, and sounds all very exciting, but what are you excited about for most over the next few months? Is there a particular project that's on the horizon, or is there too many to choose from?
We're in a really fantastic stage of wrapping up some amazing work we've been doing with the Office for Women in Sport and Recreation here in Victoria, which is a really unique organisation in that the Victorian government really focuses at the moment on gender equity and in sport. So they created a government department, the Office of Women in Sport in Rec, where they're mandated to create change and equity for women and girls in sport and active recreation in the state. So we've had a 3-year project with that office and have got some amazing insights. So yes, you will hear the mouthy, loud sport team talking more about that in the new year as we wrap that project up. So that's been fabulous, seeing that change that the office has been able to do over the last 3 to 4 years and part of them to create that change. But also our PhD students are doing amazing work. So that's always really exciting. We've got some amazing ones getting close to completion, some halfway through and some new ones coming. So that's always really exciting too, of not just doing exciting projects, but also growing the next generation of researchers, because I don't want to do this forever. I'll need a break eventually. That's what's keeping me excited at the moment.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome, and I would imagine they're all at different stages, so it always keeps everything interesting. And as you know, 1 in 2 Australians have a chronic condition, and yeah, it's getting worse, unfortunately. But if you could nudge the system in one way to improve the well-being of Australians, Emma, what would that be for you?
I think it would be, we know the policy levers, and in Victoria we're incredibly lucky because we do have Big Health, which their entire business is using social marketing and social campaigns and public health outcomes. So we've seen what works and it can, and I think the nudge is reminding people that it's just take the first step, and that well-being is theirs, that running doesn't have to be, there's no one way to do things, and that everyone has a thing that they can find that makes them happy. So I really think it's around the idea of setting expectations that you are enough and what you're interested in is enough. You don't have to run a marathon. If you just want to dance in the lounge room with your kids, then that's great. And I think that they're the nudges of lowering the bar of what physically active and healthy looks like.
Yeah.
That you do not have to be the ripped fitness influencer with abs to be healthy and well.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen some campaigns really starting to do that well, where we're seeing social marketing campaigns with different shapes and sizes and colours and abilities, so people see different versions of physical activity and health.
Yeah.
I think that's been really, really powerful of not holding up a very unique body type as what healthy and fit looks like. So I think those campaigns are really successful, and things like seeing women with veils or people in wheelchairs or on crutches, that visibility of the various ways of looking and being whilst being physically active, I think is probably the biggest nudge, because no one wants to be lectured to, and we want it to be fun. If it's not fun, you're not going to do it, or you keep doing it, I guess.
Yeah, I love that answer, because it's just about movement, isn't it? Just whatever way that looks like for the individual. And I know what you're saying. We can open these magazines or look at it on television. We see all these people that are fit and healthy, and I've got these 6-packs. But it's just about getting people moving. So I think then mass media campaigns are really important, as you say. Yeah, and well, whilst we're talking about movement, if we could reduce physical inactivity, which would improve population health, yeah, is there any other ways you think we could do that?
I think a lot of it around physical inactivity is around our neighbourhoods. So we have to create communities and places where communities live and work, that encourages physical activity. So it's really quite simple things. So it doesn't have to be exercise, but things like footpaths that you can walk and ride a bike on, if you're little. Good lighting, so women feel safe walking, running, swimming, cycling, whatever that they're doing. It's things like safety barriers for bikes on roads. Now, I know that whenever that happens, the local community who drive cars get crossed because they lose a lane and things like that. But if you look at those cycling nations like Denmark and the Netherlands, they have an incredibly physical active community, because why would you bother driving when you've got a highway for bikes? You know, those kinds of things are really infrastructure solutions to transport issues, but they're also physical activity. You know, so I think you've got to try and look at the ways that our community infrastructure stops us being physically active, and create those opportunities for all of that incidental exercise. So I don't know about you, but when we went into lockdown, my steps plummeted because I wasn't doing all of that incidental stuff. I'm not a runner, so I'm never going to get thousands of steps by going for a run. But as soon as I only had to walk 10 metres that way and 20 metres that way in my house, it all stopped. Whereas, you know, walking meetings, walking to and from school, riding your bike to work, those things, that's where all that inactivity can really quickly be addressed. It doesn't need to be a fancy program.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like active travel, you know, urban design. So we make sure we're, you know, designing our communities so it's safe and it's inviting for people to walk or run. And I think you're right. We've been so good at designing exercise out of our lives, haven't we? A lot of that incidental stuff has kind of fallen away. So it's trying to just reintroduce all that. Yeah, so we can get people more active, because as we know, that's a massive contributor to, you know, to lifestyle chronic diseases. Yeah, and this is our last question, Emma. So it's flew through, and it's really evident for me that you've got a really strong sense of social justice, and obviously that's, you know, carries out in the work that you do. But where do you see yourself personally in the system, and how do you contribute and influence it?
So I see myself as a facilitator. So when I've worked with different communities or different organisations, I'm not creating the knowledge or the data or the evidence. It's already there. I just help them find it and help them articulate it. I did some work in Papua New Guinea a few years ago, and one of the guys there, and it still warms my heart to say, he's like, "Oh, Doc," because they all call me Doc. Doc, you take our stories and put them into important words. And that's all I'm doing. I'm effectively facilitating, collecting the information and the data and the stories that are already there, and translating them in a way that people can understand, or governments or funders or organisations can use. Yeah, I see myself as an enabler or a facilitator of change, to help people better at it, or more money, or set up in the right way to be the change. I try and create micro changes where I have my own influence. So like working with people, I love giving people an opportunity to engage in projects, or to give people a leg up. Or if I can't do something, I will always refer on to someone, like, you really need to talk to that person. I'm not the right person. So I think also too, having a position of abundance in the work. More than enough amazing opportunities to go around. We don't have to hog them all to ourselves. So that's why I think my facilitator and an enabler for organisations, for communities, but also for other individuals where I can.
Yeah. So you're kind of working within the system. You are a conduit for what's going on, and as one of your participants in Papua New Guinea said, Doc, you know, you synthesize that information, I suppose, to tell the story in terms of the work that and the impact that, you know, you're having. Certainly seems really, you know, fantastic position at Swinburne in terms of a playground, as you call it, and you know, you've got lots going on there that you can, you know, kind of influence at different levels. So yeah, fantastic. Is there anything, Emma, that you'd like to add to our conversation?
I think the only thing is just to anyone listening, I think you are all creating change, and everyone doing a small piece really does create social progress. So I know that no one does this sort of work and very rarely works in sport and active rec for the cash and the fame. We're all doing it because we're passionate. And I think just to remind you and people who are listening that the work that we do is really important and is creating change. So don't stop.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a lovely way to conclude things. And yeah, thank you for your time today. And hopefully we'll get opportunity to meet in person one day. And wish you all well for the rest of the year.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Take care, Emma.